So thanks for coming to this session today. It's a topic I'm really interested in, but one that just barely gets a mention usually when we talk about communications. So I'm excited it's finally getting its moment in the spotlight. So Coco's going to talk through what they've been doing at KSL, and you can drop your questions and comments in, and Coco's going to take them at the end of the session. So if you've got a question, the easiest way to submit it is to use the Q&A box. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. You can pop your question in there and you can upvote other questions and add your comments, and we'll use that to sift through at the end and pick out questions. You can also add your comments in the chat box. So feel free to jump down there now and introduce yourself and say hi. Make sure you switch it to send to all panelists and attendees, unless you're just trying to send me and Coco some secrets and some juicy scandal. So yeah, switch it to all panelists and attendees and introduce yourself. Maybe tell us which union you're from. And I'm really curious to know what, if anything, you've been doing on internal comms, because like I say, it doesn't often get a mention. We are recording this session. The slides and resources that Coco refers to are on, they will be available on the event website either during or just after the talk, so you can download them from there. And we'll put the recording up afterwards if you want to share it with a colleague or go back to something that you've seen. And like with all of the sessions, if you want to chat on social media, you can use the hashtag #SUComms. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Coco. Like I say, introduce yourself in the chat box, and as we go along, you can put your questions in the Q&A box. But for now, it's over to you, Coco. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thanks a lot, Joe, for the whole comms by the computer, basically. I think she already did a little bit of intro, but before we start, a few housekeeping and very quick ones. So number one, accessibility. I think I've made this presentation like with good kind of like contrast, and the font is clear enough. And if I believe you are all having access to the closed caption, it's not 100% accurate, some funny words, but it's there. But if there's anything at any point that you don't understand, or it's not clear, or my voice is not projecting correctly, please let me know, or let the chat know, and then Joe will let me know. I'm Coco. I'm marketing and comms coordinator for KCLSU. I do love comms, and I am an internal comms geek. I've done a few courses and trainings, and I do get involved in some of the internal comms areas of work at KCLSU. What to expect today? This is not going to be a one-on-one for internal comms. I'm expecting that everyone in this talk today knows a little bit about it. I don't expect you to be experts of anything, but as comms professionals, we are kind of like aware of it. And the idea of this talk is to go through the different aspects of internal comms in a circumstance of the student union or of a small organization. So if you're tuning in and you're not from an SU, but you're from like a third sector, small charity or small organization, this is also for you, okay? As Joe said, please use the chat, use the Q&A session, and although I'm going to try to go through everything because there's a lot to unpick and there's a lot to talk about, there's going to be some time at the end for people to talk and discuss. And I also would like through the session that some people will put things in the chat about what they think. One of the things that Joe said is something that I would like to know in terms of like what people are doing in internal comms. What is your internal comms like situation at the moment? Do you have budget? You don't? Do you have people, etc.? There's no stupid answers here. Like everyone can share. And yeah, I think that's all really in terms of like housekeeping. So to start a little bit, I want to, whoops. Oh yeah, sorry, maybe a bit slower. So just to give you a few numbers, I'm not a numbers person, I'm a letters person, I hate numbers, but I love my stats. And I think they're very important when it comes to kind of like not only marketing and comms, but to give some context. And doing my research for this talk, I came across to some interesting insights that will help us to kind of like have an idea of like, what are we talking about? One of the main insights that I was gathering was the fact that around 50,000 professionals in the UK are in internal comms. So that's great. And when you look at it, you're like, oh, wow, 50,000 professionals, that's a lot. But then when you compare it with the around 3 million registered companies in the UK, that gives you around 1.5/2%. So right now, only 2% of the organizations have an internal comms team. I know that is a bit of a misleading number because if I'm not wrong, most of the people who are doing internal comms in small organizations, they're not meant to do internal comms in the sense that it's not in the role, but they're just juggling many other comms. So probably that 50,000 doesn't cover all that number, but I think it's still interesting to kind of like put that in reflection. The other thing, one of the funny things, I think Joe was using a GIF, which I love, as you will see in this presentation. I love GIFs and memes. She was using a GIF from Cinderella because internal comms is considered the Cinderella of comms. And this is a term very used across the internal comms professional because it's always considered that comms that is left at the corner, is never urgent, is always for tomorrow, and it's just always like, yeah, after crisis comes, and everything else, we will take care of that. And I think one of the few good things that this pandemic brought is the kind of like organizations, in my opinion, realized how important was to have internal comms in the room, in the conversation, in everything. 11% of the workers in the UK were working from home, or at least working from home more than 2 days a week, or were in like flexible, very, very flexible situations in the workplace, versus a 46.6% after or during COVID. So that's not a surprise, but the Institute of Internal Comms in the UK estimates that around half of that number, so around 25, 26, I told you I'm not a numbers person, but I think 26% will encourage or champion or somehow convince the organization, if not the organization already, to go either fully remote or temporary remote or flexible. So that's also something interesting for employee engagement that internal comms should keep an eye on. Quick one, every time I refer to IC, I'm referring to internal comms, just for those, and also for the transcript in PowerPoint. Another useful insight is a quick one, but is only in 1949 when the Institute of Internal Communications was founded in the UK. I know that it doesn't really distant from other disciplines and how they were recognized, and they're not very different in years, but I think it's important to kind of like recognize how new internal comms is as a discipline recognized. So that also gives us an idea. And then just to give a bit of relevance to it, 6,000 of people in the UK work in the student union. So I know it's not a big number, but I think is a considerable number to kind of like take in consideration what are we doing with internal comms in the SU or in the sex sector. Okay. Let's see if I'm lucky with the next. Yay. Okay, so also in terms of context, I also wanted to bring you a little bit so everyone is on the same page. What is and what isn't internal comms? So that wheel that looks like a trivia cheese wheel is, I will share that later on in the resources, don't worry, is kind of like a holistic approach of what the Internal Communications Institute in the UK considers that IC should cover. So this is everything that IC should cover according to them. So IC is many things, but one of the main things it is employee engagement for sure. And I'm not going to go much into details because that's obvious, but I think it's important that we understand what is and what isn't. Internal comms is also your student union internal brand. So everything from your stationery, your how your office looks, your news boards in the kitchen, to the emails that are sent to each other within the union, that is your internal brand. Okay. And SU, IC is also strategy, is culture, and ultimately, of course, is comms. Okay, so again, I'm not saying that there's other things that IC is not, but this is for sure IC. And I think one of the interesting things that we were discussing in the past, like with my teams and with other teams and like podcasts that I usually listen, is that kind of like confusion between crisis comms and internal comms, because it's very easy to kind of like get confused. And I think a part of the main fact, which is we're talking about audiences, like crisis comms is not only for internal audience, but external and internal. It's also the fact that crisis comms is something that you use when things happen. You should be prepared, you should plan, but you should use it when they happen, when there's a crisis. Internal comms, you should always use it. It's not only there for when things happen. It should be always there, and it should be consistent. Okay, what internal comms is not, and just to bring a little bit of humor here, internal comms is not the staff birthdays organizer. I don't know if that resonates to someone, but I come from the private sector before working in the in KCLSU. And if you would ask someone in the companies that I worked for, oh, what does internal comms do? They'll be like, oh, they just decorate my desk during my birthday, or oh, they're just the ones that bring the birthday cake. And this is a joke that a lot of internal comms professionals joke about, but I think it's the kind of joke that only comms people can do, because it's kind of like the eternal like bane for it. Internal comms is not the manager, director, SLT, babysitter. I have managers, SLTs, CEOs in this room. Please don't take this in the wrong way. But I think usually internal comms is considered as that babysitter that is constantly chasing, for the CEO comms, for like the all staff emails, for everything. And one of the interesting things that I don't know if some of you were yesterday in a very interesting discussion group about crisis comms in Comms by the Computer, someone was talking about the fact that, oh, we are preparing our crisis comms plan. And although we had our checking list, we just realized that there were a lot of things that were not really out, like down to us. It was like facilities, it was a lot of people involved. And I think usually, and feel free to make your comments in the chat, it is always that mistake from the comms professionals to think that we're going to solve everything and that we're going to save everyone, and the other way around as well. So I think we have to distance ourselves a little bit from that. We are enablers, like comms and internal comms enable things to happen and messages to be delivered, but they are not, and this is related to the third point, they're not a decision body or in an organizational culture. So your culture, your organization should give you the direction on where to follow and how to follow, and then you would continue according to that. I think internal comms professionals, as comms professionals in general, of course, should act as advisors. We are experts and we do know what we're talking about, therefore we can offer solutions for things. We need to also make a difference of what is an internal comms situation or solution or problem and what is not, and is based on a cultural problem from above. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of that, I'm also aware that I move a lot my hands. It's my cultural heritage, so sorry about that. I'm gonna start with the nitty-gritty of it, because I know that you will say, Coco, everything that you just said, I could find it in internet. Yes, but one of the things during my research and during my hobby, as is internal comms, when I listen to podcasts, go to courses, etc., is that as much as it's super interesting, the discipline studies too much organizations that are big enough to have budgets, to have teams, to have like they come from the basics of we have a team, we have resources, and this is what you can do. But I'm aware that in the SU perspective or the small organization perspective, is not always the case. It doesn't happen. And this takes us to what Joe was asking. It would be interesting to know from your end, what is your situation at the moment? If you wanna share, like, do you have a budget? Do you have a person? Do you have a team? If you have a team, budget, and resources, maybe this talk is not for you, or stay and have fun. But I want to bring you kind of like the tools and a conversation where we come from the circumstances that we have. That is small unions, small organizations where they also do what they can with what they have. And sometimes internal comms is not at the top of priority at all. Okay, so for that, for expectations versus reality, I bring you the ultimate mantra or motto, which is if life or the SU gives you lemons, I'm bringing you the recipe for your lemonade. Okay, so I'm just also having a little bit of my lemonade. Sorry, too much talking, but I promise we will have time for sharing. So the recipe for your lemonade. Number one, cupboard thinking. Do what you can with what you have. I know this step might sound a bit like diminishing internal comms. Again, your ideal scenario is to have a team, to have budget, to have an organization that understands the meaning of internal comms and understands the need of internal comms, which is vital. However, it does not always happen. And I think in the sphere of the SUs, it might be the case. And just because things are not happening from above, it needs to stop us from it. So I would say, start using what you have to make your IC running, if it makes sense. Number two, identify 1 to 3 problems in your organization that have an impact in the workforce. I say 1 to 3 because, again, for a small organization that is fairly new to internal comms, or even not, I don't think tackling more than 10 problems or more than 5 problems even is going to be effective. Not productive, and you're just going to get frustrated because you're not going to be able to solve everything for obvious reasons. Don't be afraid to ask the right questions if you don't know what are those problems. If you know those problems, identify them, find what are the ones that you can tackle that may help more, but ultimately discuss with your C-suite, discuss with your SLT, and don't be afraid. I think we are comms experts, and sometimes we're like, we just don't know enough, like the value we have and how people see us as experts. And we identify the problems because communicators needs to oversee the problems before they happen. And most of the time your CEO or your SLT will be more than open to discuss with you, or you can be like, these are the problems that I'm identifying. Am I correct? Do you want me to tackle this? Number 3, think of your ingredients. What do you have? This is take us very much to point number 1. But again, do like a little list of, okay, do I have budget? Yes, no, I don't have budget, but can I take a little bit of the brand budget to put a little bit on this? Or do I really need budget at the beginning? Then headcount, very, very important. Do I have someone dedicated for IC? If not, is there anyone in the team that can do part of that role? Is there anyone that can do a few hours? Can I myself train myself into IC or dedicate some of my hours of work for that? So that will also give you an idea of these are the ingredients to have a superpowered lemonade or not. Get your hands on that blender. I think I'm giving this advice and I'm not good at it because I'm that kind of person that think like if things are not perfect, they cannot happen. And that's wrong. That's very wrong. And especially in IC, most of the challenge come from the fact that, oh, I just wait until the director has some time, or I just wait until the next CEO comes, or I'm going to wait until the next year budget. Don't do that. Even if you start planning, even if you start your strategy, that's something to start on and is vital. Okay. And then show small results. When I say small, by no means I want to belittle any of the results or data that you will show or you will gather. I say small because sometimes it looks like if we don't have a chart with 1,000 open rates or here and there, it's not data. But I think in internal comms, as in any like comms in discipline in general, but in internal comms nowadays, your data is your key. Not only because it will allow you to kind of like see if the strategy is going well, see if the amount of time and budget that you're putting like is worth it, but also ultimately it is what it is. It's going to be your currency for your CEO, for your SLT, for your people outside the comms team to get things. So you don't have budget now, but you will need in the future. You don't have someone now, but you will need in the future. You will need that data, because if people struggle understanding comms, trust me, people struggle a lot understanding internal comms. And everyone at the end speaks in data. So that's going to be very critical for you. And your data can be an open rate or a click rate. That will be ideal, yes. But it can also be a before and after. It can be that you change the stationery of all your digital brand, and you show like how documents were looking before and after, and how that has an impact on the different stakeholders. Or it can be a screenshot, someone sending an email on how cool was the development day, or how, I don't know, how amazing is the latest news board in the kitchen. That is also data, and it's not only about numbers, okay? I want to finish this like block to kind of like giving you the analogy of the plant. I think we should see in the in the SU world, the internal comms as a little plant that you water a little bit. It's not a demanding plant. I know there are many demanding plants, trust me. But we have those plants that you just water them a little bit and they just give you joy. You know, you have them in the corner and you just now and then check how they are, water them, trim them a little bit. That's key, and that's how internal comms should work. I know everyone now, because COVID, they want to, you know, convert their IC strategy into like at the same level as external comms. But sadly, and I say sadly because I would love that to happen, but that's not going to be the case in the new normality, because there's always going to be an urgent thing. There's always going to be something that we have to show to the external kind of like public that IC will kind of like have the backlog and it will have an impact on it. So rather than put all your cards on it, just water a little bit and then see it growing. Okay. Before we, yes, I think Joe hasn't said anything. So unless there is anything and I'm like no one here and I'm not hearing anyone and no one is talking, I think things are going well. So I'm going to continue, and I want to bring you some case studies. So case studies are cool, I think, to check what other people are doing, and also for like practicalities. I think sometimes we're like, okay, internal comms, but like, give me what do you exactly mean by the things that you guys are doing. I brought you today 2 cases. One case is nothing to do with internal comms, and sorry, with the SU, and the other one is SU. I think it's interesting, and especially, I don't know if you guys feel that way, but I feel sometimes in the SU world, comms and marketing, we're very like culty. Everything is what happens in other unions, what other unions and unis that do and all that. And I think it's very interesting sometimes to go and see what other people from totally different sectors and backgrounds are doing, because it gives us that sense of refreshing. And that's why I bring you today the West Midlands train, Here to Listen. Here to Listen, that's not a typo, very smart slogan, was a campaign that won different awards in internal comms. And the idea was to kind of like engage with staff, give a sense of like welcoming, but also reducing the sick leave that they have, because as you know, is a sector that has like a lot of pressure, customer service, and it takes a lot of emotional toll. So they train some of their staff in first aid, in mental health, etc. And they gave them those badges that you see, hopefully, in the presentation. And the people who were like in the office or like out of their on-site working hours, they saw the people with that badge, and they knew that they could talk to them, not only from this is a safe space, you can talk to me, but they knew these people were trained. I think they saw reduced the sick leave 5% in a year, something like that. And it had very good feedback. Now, that campaign, of course, well, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that campaign had a budget behind, had team, had people. But what I find very clever, apart from the fact that they put well-being first, and I think in IC is key, is that they used their own staff to be as brand ambassadors. And as much as they invested in training, that training was back to staff and everything was back. They did not hire an external person and have like different workshops and stuff. They just had their own people talking on behalf of their brand from a very total personal perspective. And I think it was really cool. And as much as you had budget for it, I think is a very like low-key kind of thing to do, but has an impact. The other case study that I bring you from the SU, it wouldn't be anything else but KCLSU, of course, is Kudos for Colleagues. And this is something that we did, I don't want to say totally accidentally because it wasn't, but it was not part of our strategy. It was not something that we knew we're going to do. Kudos for Colleagues is a little shout out on our weekly newsletter. We have a weekly newsletter that is called the Weekly Insider. And people can email, in this case, they can email Sophia, the person who takes care of the newsletter, among many other things. But you email Sophia and then you say, anonymously or not, and you give a kudos for a colleague, something like someone that worked with you in a project, someone that you, any sort of thing. Then that is published. And then it's just, yeah, people can see like their kudos and like how, you know, people interact. I think is one of those things where you don't really know how is it going to go, but we knew as part of, as I said, that it's not, it wasn't like accidental, but we knew we wanted something for staff to engage. So this started around May, and we identified and we knew that KCLSU staff started to feel a bit disconnected, not only from other people, but from the sense of belonging to KCLSU. I think it's very easy to kind of like, very easy going to start reflecting, like, what am I doing? Where is my future? Where am I going with KCLSU, etc., or with any union? And Kudos for Colleague was kind of like a little bit of like a relief for people to realize that they were praised, and they were praised not by the organization, hey, everyone, you're great, but from the real colleagues, which I think that kind of like made the difference. In the past, we tried different things. For example, we had KCLSU Recommends, which was, in my opinion, a very cool initiative where staff basically recommend things based on themes. So this week we bring you, I don't know, veggie restaurants or films or things like that. We ended up, the marketing team ended up literally chasing and giving our own constant feedback, and it was not authentic. So sometimes things work, sometimes things doesn't. I think during COVID, a lot of things and initiatives related to engaging and feeling closer did work, but I think it's also a bit of a trial and error. So we had more than 30 colleagues praised and more than so far 25 people emailing us. And the nice thing is that you also send kudos, or we've received kudos from people that they don't work usually together. For example, one of your problems might be the silo type of working, which is like very common in the SU. And we had people working with other people. Like, for example, we received, the one that you see in the example is, I've been working closely with that person during furlough, and I did not realize how skilled is that person, how amazing is that person. Or some other person like wrote to the newsletter saying, this team reached out to me during the BLM situation, and I really, really acknowledge that. So people who usually don't work together, they just started to praise each other. And then you had that later interaction where people were writing. So you would receive your newsletter, you will see that Coco wrote something for you, and then you will send an email to Coco and be like, oh, thank you very much. And that follow up the conversation. So we've been 3 months with that, and I think it's been really, really nice, and zero budget. So moving over, I want also to bring you my one and only, the 10 plus commandments of internal comms for the SU. I say 10 plus because now I would like also people to put their commandments. So ideally we will have a whole list of more than 10. And I know that this is going to be recorded and probably you will see the presentation, but I'm also happy to send across to whoever is interested the updated list with like the contributions of the people. So yeah, let's start. So number 1, be bold, be brief, and be gone. This is a sentence I stole with from some of the internal comms big dogs out there. I steal a lot of their sentences, and is related to all those struggling with the CEO SLT buy-in kind of thing. I think like it's what we were discussing at the beginning. How do I get my comms team and my non-comms team to get my strategy? How do I get the CEO to understand what we are doing, etc.? I would say be bold, don't worry on like asking and saying, these are the problems and I know they are the problems. Be brief. I think it's important also, as much as I say, don't be the babysitter, etc. CEOs, SLTs, they are not it's not their job to be communicators. So you need to understand that A, they don't have all the time that you wish they had. B, sometimes they don't understand what you're talking about. Our language can be very, very comms, very internal, even if we don't know. And sometimes they know that what you're saying is important, but they cannot really see it, because IC is a very non-tangible kind of like discipline. So I would say be very brief and have your facts, be factual. So say, these are the problems, these are the solutions that we suggest, or these are the things we're going to do to help you solve that, and then be gone. Okay. Number 2, different people, different platforms. I think this, obviously, you can adapt this to also like external comms as well. I think most of the times in external comms, we know everything about our channels. We're super experts. We know which channel works for everything. And often in internal comms, then when it comes to IC, it's like, oh, what do I do now? And most of the time we will get frustrated because people don't read all our emails, or people don't read the all staff emails, etc. And maybe sometimes it's because of the channel. So in the SU, for example, I guess is for most of the SUs, but at least in KCLSU, we have a very diverse range of audience. We have student staff, we have perm staff, part-timers, contractors, King's staff, like from uni, and they have a different relationship with KCLSU, and they have a different perception of what KCLSU is for them, and what do they want out of it. So I think it's important that sometimes we need to stop and see what our audience, what do our audiences need in terms of channel. To give you an example, in KCLSU, we do have Facebook groups for the student staff that work in venues. We as perm staff, we don't use Workforce or we don't use Facebook or anything. We use Teams, and we use it even more during COVID, but still we're learning. But the student staff in the venues, they use Facebook. And what happens is that we have an all staff email, or an email that goes to managers, and then those managers, those venue managers, take that information and pass it onto Facebook. It works not only because of the channel is what they, is what they consume, but also because they see that manager, that venue manager, as the trust person that gives the information. Most of them, and I guess is the case in many unions, don't know the CEOs. They've never talked to them, or they know them, but they've never had a conversation. So receiving an email from someone that you don't know versus a message from someone that you don't know makes a huge difference. So think if that can be something that you can implement in your strategy. Number 3, and I highlighted it, some of my favorites, is be an SU ambassador. I think in an ideal world, I will ask you to be the SU ambassador, pink rainbows, that loves the SU and everything is great, because that's the ultimate goal. But I'm also aware that as much as you are comms experts, you are staff as well. And it might not be always the case. You might not have that personality. You might not be at that time of being the super ambassador of the SU, or you might not be aligned at that moment with the values, and that's okay. However, I encourage you to be the SU ambassador from the information point of view. I don't know if it happens to you, but most of the time to our team, to the marketing and comms team, people ask us things that we don't know. People is like, so when is the next bank holiday? Or, hey guys, when are you going to send this email? And we're like, we don't know. But people do consider us as the source of information. And sometimes, even though they receive the CEO email or the all staff email, they also know that you knew that information before, and that you will understand because you are the one communicating that. So I would say, if you don't want to be a pink rainbow, everything in the SU is great, also know your facts and try to know as much as possible about the SU, because that will also benefit the internal comms reputation in general. Number 4, less is more. And I think that is a quick one, and that can be applied in all sort of comms and everything, especially in internal comms. As we were saying with the analogy of the plant, there's no point of now expecting to turn your IC in like we have 10 problems, we're going to have 11 solutions, and we're going to dedicate 11 hours a week, because that's not going to be the reality. So more quality than quantity is key. And also time-wise, I think there's two sort of like schools of thinking. One of them being like, oh yeah, it's great to plan ahead, and the more you plan ahead, the better. And there's another school of thinking that is like, it's good to do like short-term planning. I love a plan. I'm a planner, but I am more in internal comms. I think that the second way of thinking, which is short-term plans, is the best. I'm going to share after some resources that include that, some points around that. And from the courses that I attended and the trained I was in internal comms, no one really recommends to do strategies or to kind of like work in your internal comms for like with objectives more than 6 months from 6 to 9 months. First of all, if I told you 6 months ago that we will all be in comms by the computer via Zoom, you'll be like, yeah, sure. But secondly, and more important, is because we all know how the SU turnover is well known, is a very fast kind of like pace kind of sector. In a year, you may have one director, 2 new coordinators, a new CEO. And that is how it is. So you rather adapt and have like a 6 month, 9 month plan, or if you want like a 9 month, 1 year plan, constantly review it. And have your goals, but say at this time, we're going to review this and see where we are. So I think that is key as well. Number 5, C is for consistency. This is also very easy peasy for comms experts, and I'm not telling you anything new, but I think in internal comms, be that annoying person that HR considers you are when they don't use the right logo, or be that annoying person that staff rolls their eyes because you complain because the news board in the kitchen is not up to date. I think it's very important, because is that little plant in the corner forgotten, that if we don't keep the consistency, it's just by the time you go again, you just have to go all the steps that you didn't do in the past. Okay. Number 6, constant learning. I think being a newish, kind of like a baby toddler discipline, or at least recognize, is important that we acknowledge the fact that it's a constant learning idea. I know like in marketing and comms is as well a constant learning, something that is cool today, it might not be cool tomorrow. But in internal comms, something that even what we're talking about consistency might be not a thing tomorrow. One of the things that I didn't add in number 5, which I think it can be useful, and it might be general knowledge for everyone, but maybe not for some, is also be consistent in your comms. Start educating your audience in the fact that if you have a newsletter, and if you do now that your newsletter is every day at the same time, the same day, great. If you have emails that are, for example, COVID related or all staff emails, try to be consistent with it. I'm not saying, well, I cannot commit to like every Tuesday email because we won't have content. Well, try to plan. So if it's not every Tuesday, is a Tuesday and is at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day. Okay. Jumping onto number 7, data is your best friend. I'm not going to go much into this one because we discuss about data in the other slides, but if data is your friend or your best friend in marketing and comms, data is your partner in life. In internal comms, trust me, is really, really important. And I'm not tired of saying it, and I will not stop saying it. You really need to get your info and your numbers and your letters, screenshots, everything about it, about what internal comms made a difference to the organization. Number 8, no IC without diversity and inclusion. If you're in a union that you have a team that does D&I, great. Congratulations, hats off. If you are in an SU that has a HR team that constantly and works like collaborative with that area of work, that's great. Take as much as you can from them and implement it on your IC kind of like area of work or strategy. If that's not the case, be that person. Include DNI in your in your strategy, in your way of working, in everything. I don't conceive internal comms in London, UK, any big city in 2020 without inclusivity in the conversation. Okay. Number 9, always get staff voices. I know some of you will be like, Coco, we're 10 people in our union. Of course, I know what my staff thinks about things. I reckon that what your staff tell you in the kitchen at 10 a.m. having a cuppa together is not the same thing that they're going to say in an anonymous form. So don't be afraid of have little surveys, finding out what you need to know about well-being, about the brand, about things that related to the different problems that we discussed. You want to find out, because at the end, these are your people. And one of the benefits is that we're not in organizations of 3,000, 30,000 staff that is really, really hard to know what they want or what they think about. So, of course, the staff survey that we have every year is very insightful and it's very useful, but I think you all agree with me that it doesn't cover all the aspects that can help us to kind of like enable that, okay? And number 10, and I could do the whole presentation based on this point because I think it's really, really, really important, not only during this time, but always is put yourself first and your team right after. So look after yourself, look after your team is key and is priority. I think I want to use, I haven't read the book, but I want to use the quote of like Kevin Lawrence, I think, with the put the oxygen mask first. I think often comms professionals get a lot of kind of like emotional toll on things. Like if you think about a social media coordinator, bless them, they take a lot from students and it's a customer service relationship, people at hubs, people who are digital frontliners. I don't want to compare them with frontliners, but understand me, they take a lot. In internal comms, you get the same, but the audience is your people, is your staff, is people you know. So be very careful and be there, be for them, like work, find out, work on it, but make sure that your team, it's okay. Make sure that this is not going to take a lot on your team, not only from the staff, but also whenever you have to bring this back to kind of like CEO, SLT, etc. Just make sure that that's covered because it's really, really important. And that is my 10 commandments. I hope that people have put some, but feel free to put them after. And before leaving the virtual space for people to talk, I would like to give you a treat. So I'm giving you a 4-3-2. So I'm giving you today 4 people to follow if you are in internal comms, 3 podcasts and blogs, and 2 resources. So the 4 people to follow, you have Katie Macaulay. She is an amazing, amazing podcast host. And she also is the CEO of a very important internal comms agency in the UK. Advita Patel for everything trend. She's the coolest I see out there, and she knows the latest trends. Jenny Field, I believe she is the president of the Chartered Institute of Communication, and she's, excuse my French, but she's a badass in internal comms. And Kamna Narin for everything that is inclusivity in the internal comms. I promise you, she is super inspiring. So if you're interested in, follow them. 3 podcasts and blogs very quickly. Number 1 is the Internal Comms podcast. It's a little bit mainstream, but it's very useful, very cool, and it gives you a sense of what different people are doing. And it's quite nice. GovComms, that's not really internal comms, it's more government comms, as the name say. I don't know if you already know it, but although it doesn't cover internal comms, it talks a lot of things that I think are quite useful for this relevant topic in the SU. It talks a lot about comms with leaders, how to get leaders to buy into press releases and stuff. So I think that's also interesting. And then Banana Tag blogs, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Banana Tag. Hashtag this is not an ad, but they are, for those who are not aware, they are sort of a kind of like a competitor of MailChimp. Basically, they have a software of email generation. And although you don't have to sign up and pay or anything, they have their content strategy is mind-blowing. They have podcasts, resources, blogs, everything. Everyone big in internal comms has participated in their blogs or somehow. And then tool resources, I think Joe said how at the beginning, but we can discuss later how. But I prepared for you two main things that I think will be very useful. Number one is the internal comms strategy template that I got from my internal comms training and course in the International School of Communications. And although don't think that, oh, that doesn't adapt to me, oh, this is too generic. It's just a template where you can just take what you think and then if not, use it as a checklist, like this, we're going in the right direction, okay? And then the second is the profession map by the Institute of Internal Comms. This is something that they've put together, if I'm not wrong, at the end of 2019. Is a long document, is a text heavy, have it with a cup of tea and some time, but it's really, really, really interesting. And it basically is a map or like a toolkit with everything that the internal comms profession should cover and should work. It's almost from a scientific point of view, but it's really, really, really interesting. So these are the two things. One thing I forgot before we go into the thank yous and all that is that I think is interesting to see that the big dogs of internal comms are positions filled by women, and not only women, but very diverse women, which tells us not only, I mean, to me personally, is very inspiring, but I think it also tells us the reflection of how internal comms should be, like in terms of like inclusive and like taking different aspects of intersectionalities and all that. So that's kind of like my reflection. And yeah, I just want to now give the space. I don't know how we are in time really, but I want to give a big thank you for everyone. Big thank you to Joe. Thank you to my team, to my manager. There's always been supportive and like picking up their brains for things. And if you guys are interested in anything comms, it's not only IC that I do, but comms in general, please let's connect on Twitter and LinkedIn. And thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, so I've put the link in the chat to your slides and where people can download those resources, and the link that has your contact details and stuff so that people can get in touch. We've got time for a couple of quick questions. Could you tell us, are there any particular internal comms methods or tools that you would suggest for a very small organisation? Are there any kind of easy, cheap, probably things?
I think obviously I wouldn't mind to be like 8 hours talking about internal comms because I love it. But I think rather than give you ideas, start thinking about what are the problems. Like, for example, I cannot speak for like what are the problems in student unions, but like silo is a big thing. Like people working in silos in different campuses. And I think that is important to identify why are those silos happening. Is it a cultural thing? Is it that people are not informed? One thing that is not really, well, it is internal comms though, but one thing that we did at KCLSU is that we started to do our external comms festivals within the internal audience. So for example, we have One World. I guess you guys know, like maybe other people call it a different thing, but it's basically a festival to kind of like celebrate the diversity within the students in uni. And this is a festival for students. It's like a whole week of events, activities, etc. And 2 years ago, we did the One World Staff One World. So we did a mini festival with everyone in the staff like sharing. And we had a whole week where the office was, for example, decorated with different sentences and different fun facts from our staff that were coming from different places of the world or different cultures or faiths. We had at the end of that festival, we had a day where people brought dishes from different cuisines, like their own like cultures, etc. And then we did like a quiz where people got to know more about different cultures within the staff. So that can be, for example, I'm not saying that is the ultimate idea, but if the problem is silo and people not connecting well, maybe you want to translate one festival from the external thing that we do in the SU and bring it back. You can do the same with varsity, for example. You can do like a staff varsity or something like that, because it gives that consistency and that sense of belonging. But yeah, that can be one of like, I keep saying silo, but if people have other problems, maybe we can all share it and find ideas.
And then I guess two kind of connected questions about content. So one is about how do you gather that? And then the second is, what is the kind of content that you include in your newsletters? So where does it come from, and what works?
I am a big fan of the newsletter in general. I understand that when we're talking about 5 people in an office, maybe it's a bit irrelevant, but still find a way to have your weekly digest or your bi-weekly, because I think it's important. In our case, our weekly insider covers different things like updates from Kings, updates from KCLSU, from the CEO, from different things, and all sorts of updates. So how it works is that if you want to put something on the insider, you will write, you have some forms on Typeform, or you can email directly Sophia, and you're like, I would like this to be in the insider. Then the team has kind of like a filter, like, is this relevant? Can we put this? This is not really relevant. Can you try and put this in other channels, for example? Because sometimes there's a lot of noise, sometimes there's not so many. And then we have sections that are really depending on the time of the year. Like, for example, we have in this case, Kudos for colleagues. This is a like non-temporary, but we don't know until when, for example. We also have, for example, I don't know in the case of different unions, but in KCLSU we have, which also shout out to them, a lot of networks and groups that are voluntary groups. So you have Women's Network, you have Sustainability Champions, you have BME Network, and they also have updates, constantly updates and things they want to also share. So you will do a round of them, like people has anything to say, or sometimes they will. And then we tend to have for sure like news-ins and farewells, kind of like people who is new, and then farewells and stuff. And yeah, all sort of things really. Like I think it really depends on what do you want to achieve with that newsletter. Do you want to inform? Do you want people to have fun, etc.?
Cool. Well, thank you so much. It's so nice to, when someone's obviously so enthusiastic and passionate about a topic, to it definitely comes across. And I've seen in the chat a lot of people are inspired to go and do some cool stuff now. So thank you very much for that. As I said, the slides and the resources that Coco talked about are available on the Comms by the Coast website, which is where the replay of this will be up as well if you want to watch it back. But thank you, Coco. Thank you guys for coming along, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.